welcome to the Zero Ends channel. Please like and subscribe. Please enjoy our live.
Welcome again to another reading on their eventual journey to American Negro Slave Revolts. As you'll know, to let y'all know, we are now in the halfway of this wonderful book. And like always, like every reading, I learn as I go. Just like as you go back for replay or listen to this, you will learn too. There are many things to go into. This is section 1 of chapter 9. And this chapter is going to go based on the time tales of different parts of the 18th century. Or actually later parts of the 18th century. And like always, if I never told y'all this before, I'll probably tell you now. This is more, in certain streams, more of an educational piece. They would deal with certain things back in history, written. And there are many books that talks about, enslavement for people here in the West we call America. Besides other books and articles that talk about the Caribbean, we all know the slavery that went on there. Some victory, some loss. But up here in America, the mindset here to all the ADOS people or African Americans that's descended slaves, they think and they believe that their oppression was only uplifted by their oppressors, and the oppressors made it in their heart to stop the abuse and torture, rape and all that stuff to them. But as we look more into the real facts, that was not the case. He was forced to stop his foothold on you physically during them time. And with every reading, you will know more and more why he had to step in and change the way how we look at oppression and how to continue his dominance without putting his foot on your neck. So, with no further ado, we will begin this chapter. This is titled Chapter 9, 1791 through 1809. And that is a period and a span of 18 years. So let's look into this chapter. The dozen years following 1790 formed a period of more intense and widespread slave discontent than any that had preceded, with the possible exceptions of the much shorter period from 1737 to 1741, and that's a period of 4 years. Some of the factors that help explain this phenomenon have already been examined, such as the revolutionary philosophies, then prevent abroad and at home, the great Negro uprisings in the nearly West Indies, and the several depressions that gripped the South, especially North Carolina, Virginia, and Louisiana. For particular, the entire period, some further particular may be noted as possible of importance in the same connections. For example, the defeat of St. Clara by the Indians in November of 1791 caused a great alarm in western Virginia, while provocation by the whites started the Cherokee south of the Ohio's on the warpath in the summer of 1793. Both events necessitating the absence of large bodies of militants from areas of considerable concentration of slaves. Again, in 1793 and 1794, the slogan of liberty or death rang through western North Carolina and Virginia as part of the Whiskey Insurrection. The excitement and implications of what may possibly have reached the slave, it has been remarked that a contaminating of depression during these years was a disproportionate population growth so that the number of Negroes increased more rapid than the number of whites. This may be exemplified by the conditions in the two states, Virginia and North Carolina, most disturbing by slave unrest. In North Carolina, the Negro population increased by 32% from 41.6% for the free Negroes and from 1790 to 1800, while the white population showed a growth of but 17%. That is a lot of growth within a short period of time. And normally, because most of our people at that time were very fertile, some are still fertile today. Let's continue. The bulk of this portion centered in the eastern portion of the state. Similarly, in Virginia, during the decades, the whites population grew by 16.2%, the slave population by 17.8%, and alarming indeed, the free Negro population by 56.4%. The figures for the two eastern sectors, Tidewater and Piedmont, sharpened these trends. Thus, in the Tidewater areas, the white population increased by the 1.2%, and the slaves over 6%, and the free Negroes by 55.8%. Indeed, out of 30 Tidewaters counties comparable for the period, 19 actually lost in white population, while but 10 of those very slightly in slave population. In the predominant of the white advance, 11.4%, and the slaves 28.4%, and the free Negroes 43.2%. That's a very big difference. So it seemed to me that the people that never was put in bondage were able to thrive, procreate, and have children at more than the Eurocentric counterparts and the so-called slaves that were force bred, if you notice the difference. And I think this is what they fear the most when it comes to the population of America. It is going to maintain a Eurocentric state of population of people. And you can't maintain it if your growth is very staggering, while the ones that you're trying to control and the ones that were free started to grow and grow more exponentially than you. But that's neither here nor there. Slave uprisings occurred in Lower Louisiana in 1791 and again in 1792, but details are not known. The later years witnessed serious trouble in Virginia during May, June, and July in Norfolk, Pessamont, Hampton, and the county just across the Chicopee Bay, Northampton, which appeared to have been the center of the unrest as well as alarm in Elise. And there's also a small word underlined, but you can get that from the book itself. Two western counties, Greenburgh and Kanawha, now in West Virginia and in the neighbors of New Bern, North Carolina, on May the 5th, 1792, the Northampton County militants, Lieutenants Smith Sned, received a letter signed by 6 local residents assuring him that a variety of circumstances made it clear that a revolt was imminent and urged him to get arms. Accordingly, he wrote the same day to Governor Henry Lee for 100 weight of powder and 400 of lead. A later date, Pittsburgh, Virginia, May 17, 1792, gives one or more concentrated ideas of the circumstance reporting to exist. Several alarming accounts have been received in town of a very dangerous insurrection among the Negroes in the eastern shores of Virginia. Reports state that about 2 weeks ago, the Negroes in the part of the state to the amount of about 900 assembled in different parts, armed with muskets, spears, clubs, etc., and committed several outrage upon the inhabitants. A favorite servant of Colonel Savage, who had joined them, met his master on the road, took his horse and some money from him, and threatened him in an instant manner. Sebo, a Negro, the property of Mr. Snickskin, was to command his banditee. He was also a favorite servant of the master and had long lived with him in the capacity of overseer. A barrel of muskets, balls, about 300 spears, some guns, powder, provision, and have already been discovered and taken. The spears, it is said, were made by a Negro blacksmith on the eastern shore. A considerable number of the slaves have been taken up, and it is expected will be hanging. It appears from a letter which has been lately discovered in Norfolk from one of the Negroes on the eastern shores that they had concentrated a plan with the Negroes from Norfolk and Portsmouth to commit some violence outrage in and about those towns. 600 of them were to cross the bay at a certain time in the night, and were to be joined by the Negroes in that neighborhood. Then they meant it to blow up the magazines in Norfolk and massacre the inhabitants. On May 9th, a Mr. H. Guy of Northampton had written to a militant captain of Norfolk, Thomas Newton Jr., concerning evidence gotten from ringleaders about a plot in the city. The next day, Mr. Newton wrote to the governor asking for arms and remarking, from circumstance apparent, there has been a general communication in the lower parts of the county, though we cannot for anything hear abroad or hear about. And the same day, the harassed governor received a letter from Portsmouth pleading for arms and adding that the conduct of the slave in the religious hood had long since warranted the suspicion. The fear of the people of the county are greatly alleviated from bodies of Negroes collecting among them in numbers not less than 300 and disparaging again. Next week, the governor again heard from Northampton and learned that about 10 slaves had been arrested, but that the proof was insufficient to convict them. 3, however, were banished and some of them whipped, and the rest discharged, which it was thought has had a good effect, for we experience a very different behavior among them. Let it was cautiously added, how long it will continue, God only knows. And the strengthening of the militants was recommended. A letter detailing similar activities, but concerning 16 slaves, was sent the same day from Hampton to Richmond. 2 days later, on May 19, 1792, the governor heard jointly from Mr. Newton and the mayor of Norfolk. They asked for 200 stands of arms and commitment. We have generally a number of strangers here whose interest in it will be to take up arms as well as the slaves' inhabitants, probably referring to the Negro brought by the West Indian refugees. On May 21st, Mr. Sned of Northampton was again writing, this time rather cheerfully. He felt that not many slaves were implicated and thought it worthwhile to add, no white person was concerned with them. He stated, however, that his ideal that the disaffection was not widespread. By no means is a general opinion. A large majority thinks differently. The patrols was therefore increased and sent out as often as possible, encountering no particular difficulty until July 8, when a member of it was attacked by 6 slaves. 5 of these were captures tried with amazing speed, so that by July 9th, 3 of them had been condemned and executed. It was hoped that this would be a sufficient terror and teach them wisdom. A communications from Newbern, North Carolina, dated July 26, 1792, through confidence and tone, still indicate that the unrest and terror had reached that area. The Negroes in this town, our neighborhoods, have stirred a rumor of their having a compulsion to rise against their masters and to procure themselves their liberty. The inhabitants have been alarmed and kept a strict watch to prevent their procuring arms should it become serious, which I don't think the worst that could befall us would be their setting the town on fire. It is very assured of the blacks, and to suppose that they could accomplish their views and firms the precautions that are taken to guard against a surprise little danger is to be apprehended. And a letter from Richmond, Virginia, dates November 19, told of the ever occurring phenomenon under slavery, the visitation of armed outlawing fugitives slaves, this one in Charles City County, and resulting in the killing of an armed overseer, followed by the capture with the aid of dogs and about 10 of the Maroons. On the night of July 20th, 1793, a certain Mr. Randolph of Richmond was awakened by voices. I arose and went softly to my window, when I discovered 2 Negroes close to the wall of my house. Under one, the one spoke to the other, telling him that the blacks were to kill the white people soon in this place. The other asked how soon, and the order replied, there must be a day set. He said, when? And the other answered, between this and the 15th day of October. The other said, you won't kill them. He replied, was 3 or ill, he damn if we don't on the 15th of October. Soon a third joint, then, and the slaves were verbally dividing the house amongst them. One, who seems to be the chief speaker, said, you see how the blacks has killed the whites in the French island and took it a while ago. This deposition and a copy of a letter found in New York town, signed a secret keeper, Richmond, arose the fear of fire, Itterman, Pittsburgh, so that on August 17th, they asked the governor for arms. A similar appeal, dates August 21st, came from Portsmouth. 2 days later, the governor, director, and the militant in Richmond is said to be on the alert, while James Wood, the lieutenant governor, received a request for arms, dates September 10th, from Elizabeth City, the writer, declaring, I am satisfied this county is in danger, and I hope you will use your best endeavors to aid us with arms. The immense John Marshall himself sent a letter he had received from Powhatan to the governor describing the escorting of Negro drivers and whipping of numerous slaves, and affirming taking all matters into consideration. I can't help think that the intent rising is true. The commandment offers of the militant of Warwick County forward a plea for arms on November 25th and declared, since the melancholy affirms a Hasponoil of inhabitants of the lower county, and especially this county, has been repeatedly alarmed by some of their slave having attempts to raise an insurrection, which was timely suppressed in this county by executing one of the principal advisors of the insurrection. Evidence of organized disaffection in Charleston, South Carolina in 1793 has been noted. In addition, several fires in Albany, New York during the month of November of the same year, which caused damage totaling $250,000, were set by slaves. 3 of them, a man and 2 women, were executed for this early in 1794. In the spring of 1795, 2 conspiracies, one in which at least was quite serious, were uncovered and surprised and pointed Compay at St. Landry Parish, Louisiana, of the later North more than its existence, or nothing, is known, while the information concerns the Pote Coupier episode is incomplete and rather uncertain. From the available evidence and facts concerning this plot appear to be as follows. Slaves in Pote Coupier Parish planned to rebel and kill their masters by some disagreement among the leaders, as when they began to actually attack led to conspiracy disclosures. The Regard Force and militants units of Spanish governments were immediately present into serving for the purpose of apprehending the insurrections. Some of the Negroes resisted capture, and in the ensuing struggle, about 25 of them were killed. Approximately the same number were executed, and the bodies of several of the rebels were left hanging in various parts of the parish as the demonstrations of the fate await slaves who should emulate them. It appears that a few whites, probably 3, were implicated in this effort, and they were banished from the colony. Carabolt issues a decree in June 1795 for the purpose of keeping them, the slaves, in that state of content and subordination which would alienate them from the wish of acquiring a freedom which has cast so much blood to those as Saint Domingo. For this he ordered that each slave was to get a barrel of corn in the ear each month, and either some waist hand for his own use, or a lenten shirt and trousers in summer, and coat and trousers in winter. He was to work from sun up to sundown, with a total of 2½ hour for resting and eating. He was to rest on Sunday, except during harvest, when he was to be paid about 30 cents for each Sunday work. Not all was amelioration, however, for a new code detailing methods of punishment, organizing a police system, and stating when the killing of slaves would be proper, was also enacted. And as a final precautionary step, the slave trade was forbidden, and a prohibition that lasted for 4 years. Now, I think this is when they stopped, when they really had to stop importing slaves from Africa during the end of the 1700s, because of all what has arrived from the killings, the plots of killing masters. It got to a point where now keep bringing in, importing more fresh slaves was deemed fateful and dangerous for a lot of people that was already settled here in the West we call America. So they started to forbid it around that time. And this is during the late 1700s, mind you. The neighborhoods of Wilmington, North Carolina, was harassed in June and July 1795 by a number of runaway Negroes who in the daytime secretly secrete themselves in the swamps and woods. At night, committing various depredations onto neighborhood plantations. They killed at least one white man, an overseer, and seriously wounded another. About 5 of them Maroons, according to a report on July 3rd, include the leader known as the General of the Swamp, were killed by hunting parties. It was hoped that these well-timed severities or 70s would totally break up their nest of masquerades. In all events, this town was nothing to apprehend, as the citizens kept a strong and vigilant night guard. On July 14th, the capture and execution of 4 more Maroons were reported. 3 days later, it was believed that only one leader and a few deluded followers were still at large. Mentions has already been made of the presentment of the Cowan County, North Carolina grand jury in May 1796, denouncing the Quakers as responsible for the slave unrest, declaring to the shockingly prevalent and citing as proof of this the frequency with which the crime of arson was committed in the era. Note has been taken of similar troubles in Albany, New York in 1793, and Charleston, South Carolina from 1796 to 1798. These were, however, by no means the only region hit by incendiarism during the decades, which was often blamed upon the slaves. In December 1794, a reward of $5,850 was offered for the discovery of an incendiary held responsible for a disastrous fire in Augusta, Georgia. Better phrase. Charleston was swept by fire in November of 1795, as well as later, and in his case, large rewards were offered for the apprehension of the guilty person. The governor promised pardon for those confessing and declaring a day of fasting. I think that's a Christian thing, the fasting thing. I could be wrong. But let's continue. In 1796, fires alarmed not only Charleston, but New York City, Newark, Elizabeth, and New Jersey, Savannah, and Baltimore, with contemporary general conviction that slaves were the agents. A series of fires in Fredericksburg, Virginia, in April 1799 was declared to be the works of incendiaries, while James T. Gallagher, writing to Thomas Jefferson on September 29, 1800, from the Richmond jail, then overcrowding by the slave followers of Gabriel, declared, "It has come out that the fire in Richmond within these 2 years was the work of Negroes." The excitement throughout the nation, particularly in 1796, became of those recruiting mysterious fires was extraordinary. One contemporary declared it was great that they aroused by the yellow fever epidemic of the same era, it is impossible to confidently express an opinion as to the real cause of these fires, or any of them, but it is pertinent to note that the fact that they were generally ascribed to the deliberate working out of plot amongst the slaves. In addition, in the foregoing, there were two rather small and apparent spontaneous outbreaks in Virginia. During these years, the former slave Austin Stedward told of the resistance of a group of slaves to search by a patrol in Prince William County in about 1797. He states that 4 whites were killed and 1 wounded, while 6 slaves died and 2 suffered wounds. This causes great alarm and perfect consternation. And later in 1799, there was an uprising among a group of Negroes in Southampton County who were being transported to Georgia. Accounts agree that 2 whites were killed, but the fact as the number of slaves executed is not clear. Estimate ranged from 4 to 10. Probably the most fearful year in the history of America, Negro Slave Revolts, is that of 1800, for it was then that Nat Turner and John Brown were born, that Denmark Vesey bought his freedom, and it was then that the great conspiracy named after Gabriel, slave of Thomas H. Proser, and Henrico County, Virginia, occurs. And this Gabriel and the chosen leader of the rebellious slaves was a 24-year-old giant of 6 feet 2 inches, a follower of the courage of intellect above his ranks in life, who had intent to purchase a piece of silk for a flag, on which they would have written death or liberty. Another leader was Jack Brawler, 4 years older and 3 inches taller than Gabriel, who felt that we had as much right to fight for our liberty as any man. Gabriel's wife, Nanny, was active too, as were his brother Solomon and Martin. The former conduct the sword mask making, and the later bitterly opposed all suggestions of delay and the outbreak, declaring before he would any longer hear or bear what he had bored, he would turn out and fight with his stick. The conspiracy was well formed by a spring of 1800, and there is a hint that when of it early reached Governor Monroe, for in a letter of Thomas Jefferson dated April 22nd, he referred to fear of a Negro insurrection. The crude sword and bonnet, as well as about 500 bullets, were made by the slave through the spring, and each Sunday Gabriel entered Richmond, impressing the city's features upon his mind and paying particular attention to the location of arms and ammunition. Yet, as Colander wrote, it was kept with incredible secrecy for several months, and the next notice of apprehensions of revolts appear in a letter of August 9th from Mr. James Ganner and the Pittsburgh to Mr. Augustine Davis in Richmond. This letter was given to the distinguished by Dr. James McCurry, who informs the military authorities and the governor. The next disclosure came during the afternoon of the day Saturday, August the 30th, set for the rebellion, and it was made by Mr. Mosby Shipyard, whose slaves, Tom and Farrell, had told him of the plot. Monroe, seeing that speed was necessary and secrecy impossible, acting quickly and openly, he appointed three allies for himself, and asked for and received the use of the Federal Armory at Manchester, post cannons at the capital, called into service well over 650 men, and gave notice of the plot to every militant commander in the state. But as a contemporary declared, upon that very evident, just about sunset, there came on the most terrible thunder, accompanied with an enormous rain, that I ever witnessed for the state. Between Prosser and Richmond, there is a piece called Brook Swamp, which runs across the high road, and over which there was an mist-torn bridge. Why, this is Afro-American word of necessary to pass, and the rain had made the passage impracticable. Nevertheless, about 1,000 slaves, some mounted arms with clubs, signets, I think that's a sword, homemade bonnets, and a few guns, did appear at an agreed upon rendezvous 6 miles outside the city, but as already noted, attacks was not possible, and the slave disbanded. As a matter of fact, even defensive measures through attempts could not be executed. The next day, the mobilized might of an aroused slave state went into action, and a score of Negroes were arrested. Gabriel had attempted to escape via a schooner, Mary, but when in Norfolk of September 25th, he was recognized and betrayed by 2 Negroes, captured and brought back in chains in Richmond. He was quickly convicted and sentenced to hanging, but that execution was postponed until October 7th, in the hopes that he would talk. James Monroe personally interviewed him, but reports from what he said to me, he seems to have made up his mind to die, and to have resolved to say but little on the subject of the conspiracy. Along with Gabriel, 15 other rebellions were hanged on the 7th of October. 21 were reported to have been executed prior to this, and 4 more were scheduled to die after October 7th. A precise number of these executions cannot be given with certainty, but it appears likely that at least 35 Negroes were hanged for condemning slaves' escapes from prison, and no reference to their recapture has been seen, while 1 commits suicide in prison. These Negroes, who were conscious revolutionists, behaved nobly. A resident of Richmond declared in a letter of September 20th, 1800, of those who have been executed, no one has betrayed his cause. They have uniformly met death with fortitude. An eminent eyewitness of the rebellion conducted while in custody, John Randolph, 6 days later stated, "The accused has execute or exhibit a spirit which it is becoming generally most deluge or deluge in the southern country in blood." Southern country in blood, actually. They manifest a sense of their right and contempt of danger, and a thirst for revenge, which portends the most unhappy consequence. Monroe laconic comments concern his interview with Gabriel a short time before the later execution has already been quoted. Such testimony added credibility to the story told by an Englishman who visited Virginia in 1804 on the afternoon on September 25th on the year as he tells the tale. And this is what he tells. I pass by a field near Richmond in which several poor slaves had lately been executed on the charge of having an intent to rise against their master. A lawyer who has present at their trial in Richmond informed me that on one of them being asked what he had to say to the courts in his defense, he replied in a manly tone of voice, I have nothing more to offer. And then what General Washington would have had to offer had been taken by the British and put to trial by them. I have adventures my life in endeavoring to obtain the liberty of my countrymen. Oh, let me go on my tongue. And on a willing sacrifice to their cause. And I beg as a favor that I may be immediately led to execution. I know that you have predetermined to shed my blood. Why then all this mockery of a trial? That's a true soldier right there. You hear that? Why you waste this time? Trial. You're going to execute him anyway. So get it over with. You see, back then, they didn't make men like that. It's very rare you find men today, could sit there and say, all right, I do this and what? And if you're going to take me out in this, get rid of me. That's a sign of bravery. I'm sorry to tell y'all. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is. That's confidence. That's showing that he's sure that what he did was for the betterment and he accepted his death with a smile. Man, that's powerful. I ain't gonna lie, that was powerful. But let's continue. The character of the rebellion and their aim caused conscience searching on the part of the one-time rebellion who was at the moment governor. He wrote to another who had played a leading role in a bloody revolution, written an immortal manifesto of rebellion, and was at the moment the key figures in a bloodless revolution. The presidential campaign of 1800, James Monroe wrote to Thomas Jefferson asking his advice about the execution of a Negro leader. Mr. Jefferson replied, and quote, well, the order of states and the world at large will forever condemn as if we indulge a principle of revenge or go one step beyond absolute necessity. They cannot lose sight of the right of the two parties and the object of the unsuccessful ones. 10 of the condemned slaves were reprieved and banished, as had been previous mentioned, and this again is indication of the attitude of the slave. Methodists, Quakers, and Frenchmen were to be spared by the rebels. It is also very interesting to observe that the Negro expects, or at least hopes, that the poor whites aid them in their efforts to destroy the system of slavery. The Negroes have been aware, too, of the strained relations between the United States and the French, which from 1797 to 1799 have brought the two nations to a thoughtful, modern stage of undeclared war, leading to the slaves to hope for French assistance, and that very recent reduction in the Federal Army follows improvement, and these relations were also noticed and used as an argument against postponing of the uprising. It had been planned to be recruited allies from among the Chattawa Indians. But it is difficult to say just how many slaves were involved in the conspiracy. One witness at the trial said 2,000, another 6,000, and a third 2, or actually 6,000, and third 10,000. The governor of Mississippi Territory said 50,000. Monroe himself asserted it was distinctly seen that it embraced most of the slaves in this city of Richmond and the neighborhood, and that the combination extension to several of the adjacent counties, Hanover, Carolina, Lewis, Chesterfield, and to the neighborhoods of the Point of the Fork, and there was good cause to believe that the knowledge of such a project prevails. Order parts is not the whole of the state. Although Monroe was of the opinion that the plot did not extend beyond the borders of the state, there were repercussions elsewhere. There were rumors of rebellions in North Carolina, but what the foundation, in fact, this may have had a unclear. It is, however, a fact that at the trial of Virginia rebellions, a slave did testify that he had asked Gabriel whether the Jack Broward was versed in the art of war, or verses to the art of war. And the Gabriel had replied in the negotiative, but had declared that a man from North Carolina who was at a siege of New York, or of Yorktown, was to be with them and provide the necessary technical knowledge. Many free Negroes were offered out of Massachusetts because suspicion of the design of the Negro are entertaining, and we regret to say there is too much cause. The precautionary measures and statements issuing from the executive of the Territory of Mississippi had already been noticed, and at least have also, and the rumors certainly grossly exaggerate of serious disturbance in South Carolina. The later reports reached the notice of William Van Murray, a United States minister to Batavia, and one of the envoy extraordinary to the French Republic. His observations are of such interest as to merit extensive quotations. He wrote to John Quincy Adams that if these reports were true and the rebellion was serious. And we'll stop right here. Now, in reflection, before I look at anything else, the chat room, that was a lot. And like I said, they don't make men like that back in the old days, like how we see now. How we see communities and men today act more funny and weak than more than ever. And the funny thing, during the time when most ADOS people are African Americans, during the time that were descendant of slaves that knew were slaves, they operate accordingly. They have fought, they have died, and they have really made the great change that actually made this country what it is now. And it proves evidence that they stopped importing slaves during the end of the 1700s, from what was read now. So when people said they didn't think that it was true that they were still importing slaves during up to mid to late 1800s or end of slavery, that was a lie. They stopped during the end of the 1700s. And the reason be because the slaves that were here already were giving them problems already, just controlling, because every time they put them in bondage slave, they would do two things: either escape or kill the master. And it was getting out of control to the point where they had to make militias, other militants, to push back against these blacks that were going out and fighting for what is theirs. So one way for them to cut back, because of the numbers of the population of Negroes, free or slave, were greater and were growing much faster than the Caucasoids or whites during the time. That was actually that was the right move for them. A lot of people don't like that, but that was the right move, because you would keep importing more slaves. The population is already growing, right, with the slaves by 28.5%, and the frees like 44%, and with whites less than 20%. So if you do the math, it was actually suicide to keep bringing in more slaves. And they were bringing slaves up to when they start during the late 1500s, going on to the 1600s, when they start importing Africans from the continent, from the Caribbean to America. So let me look at the chat room. Okay. Okay, I guess people like the stream. And there's no questions from what I'm seeing now. So, like I always, I hope you enjoyed the stream tonight. This is only part or section 1 of chapter 9. So to wrap up this section, in section 2, we're gonna go a little deeper about what really was going on for the first 18 years of 1791 through 1809. Like always, comment, subscribe, and like this video and the stream. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, take care.